thank everyone for joining us this morning in what I think will be a very interesting conversation on the responsible metaverse. By way of introduction, I'm Costi Perricos. I lead our AI and data business in Deloitte, and metaverse is one of my pet topics. As many of you will know, the metaverse runs on data. In terms of my background, I did a PhD related to data and what was then the nascent forms of artificial intelligence about 30 years ago, when no one was interested in AI or data, and when definitely at dinner parties, guests would turn the other way when I said what I did. But like many of us here, we knew this technology was going to change the world. I didn't think it was going to take 30 years, but I'm now very delighted to be in such a esteemed company today and this morning to talk about the metaverse. In our preamble, our guest suggested that I actually talk a little bit about what we think the metaverse is, because you ask 10 people what is the metaverse, you probably get 15 different opinions. The way I like to frame the metaverse is really in three fields of play. The first is what I would call sort of business to consumer or typical user metaverse. Okay, that involves everything we're seeing in gaming, from the likes of Fortnite. A lot of what we're going to talk today about users effectively having a second life or digital existence in the metaverse. But I also think there are other significant use cases outside of this field of play. The ones that we are actually seeing a lot of traction in the market is in the industrial sense. So the idea of digital twins of things as big as cities to be able to regulate traffic, or industrial processes and industrial machinery. If you imagine someone like Rolls-Royce, for example, who have to test engines that cost upwards of 30, 40 million pounds to destruction to see how they're going to last, you know, not having to destroy a 40 million pound piece of kit and being able to do that virtually and digitally is, of course, a very huge value driver. And the third field of play, which again is related to the first, is the employee proposition. You know, we've all, and we will talk about this, we'll talk about the pandemic, of course, we all experience what it's like to have a virtual presence in the pandemic. The metaverse allows us to do that in a much more immersive way. We have virtual meetings with actually our clients here in Saudi, and actually doing it in the metaverse creates an experience like certainly nothing that I've experienced before. So with that little bit of context, another reason why I'm very excited to be here today is because we have a great set of panelists. Just going around the table, to my right, I've got Beverly Ryder, Chief Commercial Officer of Tonomus at NEOM, and also CEO of Portfolio T, as if that one job wasn't enough. Following on, I have Sophia Swire, award-winning social entrepreneur and impact investor. Welcome, Sophia. Opposite me, Dr. Stephen Liu, co-founder of two metaverse startups, and may I say that? And hobbyist opera singer, which I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about. Next to Stephen, Richard Margolin, CEO of Robokind, a company specializing in robotics for people with disabilities. And last, of course, but not least, Dr. Moudhi ALJamea, VP at STC and Dean of the STC Academy. So before we get into the subject, could I just maybe go around the table for you to say a few words about yourselves in the context of the panel? Beverly, let's start with you.
Why don't we start about ourselves?
Yeah.
I do, because I'm a self-talker. Sorry, everybody. So I came to Saudi about 2 years ago now. I started my journey almost 3 years ago. Somebody at NEOM actually saw me on the internet and said, hey, I know you work for Hitachi, but maybe you should come to Saudi Arabia. Took me about a year to talk my family into it, and we've been here for 2 years now, and all I can say is that, first of all, I would not be involved in the metaverse if it wasn't for the people here and the open ideas of when you guys view technology. It's much different than how the rest of the world views it, and the resources that are put to having success in this area are amazing to me. So happy to be here, and thank you guys for having me.
Thank you. So I'm Sophia Swire, and this is my third trip to Saudi Arabia in 1 year. And I started off working for Britain's biggest investment bank, and then went off to the Hindu Kush to set up 250 schools for girls. And then I ran a successful fashion business. It was one of the first sustainable fashion businesses. And in fact, Vogue developed the first ever e-commerce site for us. So you could say that I'm an early adopter of technology. I was very fortunate to be one of the first civilians to wear the Oculus Rift and to experience 3D reality, which was quite amazing. And I now run a non-profit in Afghanistan called Future Brilliance, which is about bringing digital literacy and skills to Afghan women so that they don't get excluded from the 21st century. And also, I'm raising a venture capital fund for women in tech for good. And the name of the fund is Gender Equity Diversity Investments, or JEDI. Very Star Wars, very futuristic.
Excellent. Actually, we've got a...
Oh,
Yeah.
we got our own. Okay. 1, 2, 1, 2. Every time I see a microphone, I feel like breaking out the song. Fly me to the moon. Anyway, so I'm Dr. Stephen Liu. I co-founded a couple of Metaverse startups. The acoustics is amazing here, by the way. So one is a Metaverse startup that pertains to a piece of tech that goes into Metaverses. And the other has to do with building actual Metaverses. I work with some of the most senior people in the games industry, and I'll get to that in a minute. And the third thing that I'm doing is actually I'm about to sign a couple of contracts with a couple of Metaverses doing music in the Metaverse, following the footsteps of the great Justin Bieber and the rapper whose name escapes me at the moment. Let's see, I was a professor for a while of AI. I worked in the Prime Minister's office in the UAE. I was أخصائي أول في الشؤون الدولية. We talked about this before, and I can't remember the senior advisor for foreign policies. That's the one. Yeah. And
Nice.
My DPhil in Oxford. I'm showing my age here. In those days, Herbert Simon was still alive. So it's the previous approach to AI, not machine learning, but sort of expert systems and knowledge engineering and so forth. So that's my shtick. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, I'm Richard Margolin. As mentioned, I'm CEO and co-founder of a company called Robokind. We do physical, small, facially expressive robots, as well as avatars that are primarily used to teach children with social and emotional deficits like autism and other intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we use the technologies to basically teach them how to engage, communicate more effectively with other people. And then in addition to that, I also, it'll come back and become relevant later, but I was on the final review panel for the original Ethereum NFT standard, which, as we talk about security and intellectual property in the metaverse, I think will be important. And then my kind of intro to AI actually started when I was 13 years old. I was working in a genetics lab on the Human Genome Project and got into kind of first generation neural networking and things like that. I've been in a lot of different spaces across my life, but robotics and kind of using it to help people has really kind of driven me for the last dozen years, so glad to be here.
Great.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Moudhi ALJamea. I hold a PhD in cybersecurity and algorithms design from King's College London. We worked on different algorithms, whether it's a pattern matching, whether it's in steganography, detecting malwares. I started my career as an entrepreneur. I worked in the governmental sector, and now I'm in the private sector, heading the academy at STC, which is the largest telecom company in the region, trying to be a leader in learning and innovation. We, STC, we're not anymore a telecom company. We look at different technology that we're building on our infrastructure, whether it's a gaming, whether it's a cloud, whether it's cybersecurity, just name it. So it's an exciting time for us, and allow me, Costas, to welcome you all here in Saudi Arabia and to welcome you in the FII. It's such a pleasure to have great minds like yours discussing Metaverse in this session. So thank you.
Great, and thank you for the warm welcome, Moudhi. We really are all delighted to be here. So actually, could I perhaps start by homing in on Saudi Arabia, and specifically sort of for you, Moudhi, and you, Beverly, who work in the kingdom. What are the sort of specific trends you are seeing and sort of attitudes with regards to the metaverse in the kingdom?
So let's admit at the beginning that globally we're going through a technology revolution. Everything is changing in our lives, how we communicate, how we connect, how we socialize, from different aspects, whether it's an edge computing, whether it's quantum, whether it's a metaverse. So it's really an exciting time. And when it comes to Saudi, the excitement is triple, because we have the Vision 2030. And it's really driving us to achieve our goals in positioning Saudi as a thought leader and a thought-forward leader when it comes to looking at these ideas from different perspectives and enabling our industries. The digital market in Saudi is more than $40 billion valued. We are recognized at the second risers in the G20 as the second country, and just after China. And this is huge for us.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and when we look at these incredible new technologies and what's bringing for us, we always like to enable our industries in order, for example, governments to help our citizens better. The private sector is looking at how to better serve the customer, their customers, and improve the customer experience and make what is Metaverse is known for, which is the branding, better. And regarding individuals, I think the individuals in Saudi are looking at the Metaverse as an opportunity to pursue their careers, whether they are designers. We have designers on the Metaverse. We have developers. We have gamers. Actually, in Saudi, it's one of the biggest gaming base in the
That's
whole
right.
world. Yeah. So I think actually in the last National Day celebration, I heard that there was a metaverse to celebrate our National Day, to give the opportunity to nationals to experience our customs, to experience how we celebrate the National Day. It was a great exposure for us. So definitely we're looking at the metaverse, we're looking at all these innovative technologies and how we going to invest. And I'm going to leave it to Beverly because I know NEOM is doing a great thing. So leave it to you.
Over to you, Beverly.
Yeah, so my perspective is a little bit different from a different side. So what I see is that how Saudi is moving forward and how the GCC in general is moving forward has putting pressure on the rest of the world. And it's also bringing an influx of new talent into the region. So because Saudi has, I don't know, I hear different numbers all the time, somewhere between 60 and 70% of the population is under 35. The adoption rate of technology, the view of technology is much different, but you also have a lower average age of experience. So I'm focused, and I know NEOM is focused on how do you create a larger ecosystem, how to use partnerships as well as alliances in order to bring that talent here, and then how do you actually use the metaverse to expand your reach so that the Saudi Arabian work population isn't just in Saudi, but is a worldwide ecosystem of talent. So I really feel like for the metaverse specifically in technology, we're going to strain the worldwide assets, just like we're doing NEOM. 73% of all the building materials in the world are going to be used in NEOM in the next 5 years. Well, we're doing the same thing to workforce and technology talent.
Thank you. I think you raise a really interesting point, actually, about looking at the next generation of talent, because I would argue that who we should have on a panel like this is probably a 17 or an 18-year-old. I think they might actually be far more accustomed and feel far more comfortable with some of the concepts that we're going to talk about. So if we zoom out of Saudi Arabia, I'd like to turn to you, Sophia, with perhaps a slightly different perspective. As a lifelong advocate of women in business, with, as you mentioned, an appetite for cutting edge and impact, what applications do you see for the metaverse in your work?
Well, first of all, I'd like to bring my avatar from a second life into the metaverse.
Very good.
My 2D avatar from 12 years ago, Softlit Dreamscape, has been abandoned in the second life and needs to come back to life in its new iteration. And I'd like to be able to be in 30 places at the same time and stop all this global travel. And I think that, with the metaverse, where we have a totally immersive reality, that's going to become more and more possible. We were talking earlier about your friend who was in a book launch and had 30 different things happening simultaneously. So I think that's something that can help all of us, especially those of us that are global sort of players. But in all seriousness, JEDI is investing in climate action, quality education, and good health and well-being. And I think it'll have applications across all of these areas. In the climate action area, we are investing in an amazing young female founder called Jane Mosbacher Morris, who has a company called To The Market, and she's actually sitting in the audience right now. Jane, hi.
Hello.
So her company is supply chain transparency, and one of the ways that she's starting to use the metaverse is to create samples in virtual reality. Of course, that can be done very efficiently, but it also means that you get to save on time, on the cost of transport, on all of the sort of carbon emissions, cost of moving samples around the world, and so on and so forth. So her 3D samples are going out to companies like Walmart and Farfetch and so on and so forth. So I think that that's one of the applicabilities. And then with regards to the global goals, in EdTech, we're looking at digital literacy for refugees. There are going to be 1.2 billion refugees, climate-related refugees, in the next 10 years, moving from south to north. There's already a huge problem of education and feeling of dissociation for refugees when they leave their country of origin. I mentioned earlier that I've been involved in evacuating Afghan girls and women. And we have about more than 1,000 people who are dislocated from their country of origin. And I think that the metaverse is a place where they could create almost like a haven, a hub, where they could create almost an artificial Afghanistan, and where they could create community, and also an immersive place where they could treat mental health, trauma, perhaps download, different courses in ICT and so on and so forth. I think there are ways that the metaverse will be applied that we can't even imagine today.
That's brilliant, thank you. And then just staying with the theme of EdTech and social impact, Richard, what sort of trends are you seeing?
I'm really seeing frankly, the things we're doing is there's a lack of expertise, and I was kind of starting to think along the lines of, the population here being as young as it is, and there also being a lack of experience. A lot of what we do, and the reason we're needed, is kind of twofold, right? So for the populations we serve, which is primarily autism and similar kind of deficits, these populations, their primary deficit is social interaction, social communication. And so for a lot of them, working with other people in like traditional therapy models, et cetera, is really a really difficult starting point. So the technology is easier to engage with as a starting point. We're able to use, a lot of just core evidence-based practices to teach these skills, and then start transitioning back to human interaction and generalizing it. But the other side of that, the other reason we're needed is we work in classrooms primarily, and these teachers are wonderful and they care deeply, but they are not experts. And so we're able to drop these technologies into the classroom, and with minimal training, we are able to allow these people who are already there to facilitate basically world-class systems and expertise to train and teach these kids primarily, but adults as well. And I really think that extends out further to broader training. When you do have any area where you have a lack of experience, expertise, et cetera, if you're able to develop systems like this that people can facilitate, they simultaneously learn from them as they use them. They learn more about whatever, in my case, autism, other, intellectual and developmental disabilities. But, within an hour, they're delivering world-class content and curriculum developed by, people from Harvard and Cambridge and, UCL and all these other places all over the planet. And we're able to distill that into a package that basically can be delivered immediately. So we don't need to wait years or decades for people to catch up. Or, frankly, with the Great Resignation in the US and globally, we're having trouble keeping these people in their jobs, so that whatever expertise is being developed is kind of flooding out of the spaces they're needed. So those are kind of the areas I've really been thinking about and focused in, and also really starting to think, how can we generalize some of the things I do in the special needs space to more broadly kind of bring expertise and enable people to become experts more quickly by kind of facilitating initially and then learning as they do it.
That's a great point, and I remember when we were having our discussion around, it's not just people with, let's say, physical disabilities, but with neurodiversity who find it very difficult to get into jobs because of the way interview processes are structured. But certainly in our field, there's some amazing talent that is untapped.
Yeah,
which is
absolutely. I mean, I have worked with a number of large companies all over the world, J.P. Morgan Chase, EY, others, to really develop different hiring processes to better accommodate these individuals. And I employ a lot of people on the autism spectrum as well, and we get just incredible output from them. But if we did put them through a traditional hiring process and interview process, and we didn't learn how to support them and onboard them differently, and then continue to support them in different ways once they're in, we'd probably lose them. And I think there's a huge amount of incredible brain power that right now is sitting on the sideline, untapped, and bringing neurodiverse perspectives, which needs to be part of the diversity discussion when we talk about DEI initiatives and the like. And we can, we open up these individuals who are hyper-focused, extremely dedicated, and frankly, as an employer myself, they're not gonna, they stay as long as you'll have them. So you don't, the investment is worth it, even if it's a little bit more of an upfront cost.
Completely agree. Stephen, last but not least, this is very close to your heart. What do you see the trends in your space?
Well, the big tech organizations now have all sort of jumped on the bandwagon, if you will. Microsoft just purchased Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion, right? Of course, Facebook changed their branding to Meta, and there's more developments that are to follow. Why is that? Because they see a future in this platform. Now, one thing I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding about the metaverse is that you have to have this sort of a cumbersome, clunky hardware to access it, right? It may or may not necessarily be a requirement. I mean, it is true that Meta just rolled out a rather expensive hardware to access their version of the metaverse. But the truth of the matter is, anybody that played a video game, I'm not a big gamer myself, your son is, a big Fortnite player.
Indeed.
But it turns out also that it's not necessarily a requirement in accessing and these things. Anytime you have a virtual environment where activities can take place, right, that counts as a metaverse. One of the biggest issues at the moment is that the activities that are available in these metaverses tend not to be terribly engaging. So you get the metaverses having, I think there was I don't want to quote wrong figures here, but a Web3 based metaverse was quoted to have 68 daily users, right? But it turned 68 daily users, and this is valued at a billion-dollar valuation. Now, I think the creative director of this metaverse came out and said, it is the wrong figure, because it turns out if you look at the blockchain transaction records, yes, there are transactions. There are 68 transactions. It does not correspond to the number of users. So, what is the actual number of users? 89. So, the trend, it's not so much a trend, but more of a requirement, right?
Yeah.
You need to really kind of develop engaging activities that will bring back, it's known as the core loop in the gaming industry. It brings back the users, visitors, and so forth, right? Part of it, I think, might be musical activity. It's something that I'm close to my heart. I'd like to see, on the one hand, and on the other hand, I think we will in fact see concerts that take place in the metaverses. Why is that? Because if you look at the logistics of putting on concerts, look, if you're a rock star, you're going around, you're forever on the road. You abandon your family, and you go on the road, and you do these tours and whatnot, right? Well, with the metaverse, you don't have to do that. And furthermore, if you're a concert goer, with COVID and whatnot, that was suspended to a large extent. If you're a concert goer, you don't necessarily have to make these trips, to be at concert venues, and you don't have to suffer, for example, bad weather. The Wellingtons in Britain, whenever there is a music festival, it's a requirement because it'll rain. Chances are, in Glastonbury and so forth, right? But you don't have to suffer any of that. And in particular, in the metaverse, you can interact with performers. So the Justin Bieber concert, for example, had this thing where you can send balloons to Justin to show your appreciation for the performer. So I expect to receive a lot of balloons, hopefully.
Although I have to say, Stephen, Glastonbury without rain is not Glastonbury.
That's correct. Yeah. So there was
you have to find a way to replicate that somehow.
That's right. We'll have a haptic suit that gets wet, for example.
Indeed.
So there's a great deal of requirement. I see that as a great trend as well. But I can speak more to this effect, but I'll leave it at that for now.
That's great. And I'd like to pick up on the point about immersiveness, because, to the point that you made, Sophia, we've got programs around women in AI, for example. We want to make sure that they are inclusive to some of our clients and member firms who don't have access to these headsets. And actually, I do think that it is a myth that accessibility and interaction needs all these headsets. I mean, you mentioned my son. When he's on Fortnite, if he's not reminded to eat or drink, he would just be lost in the Fortnite world. So, great. Well, look, I'd like to sort of shift gears a little bit towards sort of some of the factors that we find really important in our physical world, right? Privacy, security, inclusiveness, accessibility, all those factors. To what extent, well, it's a rhetorical question. Of course, they're very important in the metaverse. But what are your views? How do you think that people need to consider these factors when either entering the metaverse or designing them? And actually, Sophia, I'd like to start with you if possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that applying the same or similar principles of human rights that you would apply in real life would be a good starting point. In terms of enforcing basic accountability, I had a very interesting chat the other day with a woman who insisted that she had been abused in the metaverse. And I asked myself whether or not that was actually even possible. I think one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in, you talked about protection, is mental health. We've seen a tremendous amount of mental health and mental health problems with technology addiction. And I think that people who spend hours of the day in a completely altered reality may have some difficulty transitioning into, the default world, the world that we currently live in. I think there's a lot of work to be done proactively about creating standards. I would prefer there not to be a situation as there has been now on Twitter and Facebook and the internet with cyberbullying and the kinds of libel and I mean, you can say anything you want, can't you? So I think it would be great if there were standards put in place, ethical standards, and consequences for bad behavior, as there are indeed in the default world.
That's a really interesting point. Moudhi, how about you? What's your perspective?
Well, the concept really of metaverse is a co-creation, and it needs to be involved of so many, bringing everyone together and looking at the algorithms that we're developing for the metaverse, looking at the policies, the regulations, looking at the frameworks, the standards that you mentioned. It's very important to look at how we're sharing our data. These are all important when we're going into the metaverse, because safety, security, as you mentioned, it's a challenge that's been there for a long time, and I'm sure metaverse is not it's around the corner. 10 years from now, it's going to be there. So it is the opportunity right now to come together as governments, as the private sectors, as researchers, as countries, to look at the metaverse challenges or implications that will bring to us, because these are real challenges that we're facing physically, and I'm sure we're facing it now with 2.0, Web 2.0, and definitely it's going to be there in a more sophisticated way that we never thought of. So I think we have a real opportunity right now to come together to prepare for this stage and be ready for such challenge that will come just in 10 years from now. Thank you.
That's a great point. Richard, I know you're going to have a perspective, particularly given your field.
Sure. Yes, I have a few opinions here. Kind of following on, some of your statements, Sophia. I think mental health is a really important aspect of this. We have seen lots of problems really with every generation of the web in terms of things like cyberbullying and all kinds of other things. I am currently working with a professor, a researcher in the U.S. whose focus has been digital social and emotional skills for people with special needs. And a lot of her focus is primarily more teenagers and adults. And she's working with some really difficult concepts and issues, which include things like cyberbullying and how to really deal with it. People with disabilities and special needs tend to be, much higher targets for these things. Online dating is a big issue, and then that transition from online to in-person, where a lot of these individuals can become targets for human trafficking and things like that. Those things aren't really going to change as we transition from, on-screen video chats or text into virtual environments. And so I think we need to be cognizant of it. We need to develop, these are the types of things that are going to need to be taught to children as they grow up in, current generations even, not just with those with special needs, just broadly, because we all need to be aware of it. We need to make sure that people know how to keep themselves safe. We obviously need to put as much as we can in place to prevent these types of behaviors, but we need to make sure people have the capabilities and know how to be responsible for themselves as well. And then, we talked about this a little bit yesterday as well. As we start developing these technologies, especially the virtual reality component of it, we need to really talk to the people who, especially, those with accessibility issues, disabilities, how do they want to be represented? If you're someone who is paraplegic, do you want to be, do you want your avatar walking around, or do you want to be represented in virtual space as you are in the physical space? Not everyone wants to be an other. They want to jump into these worlds as themselves and continue to be themselves. So I think we need to make sure that we're being inclusive in that way, having those discussions, developing for them as well. And, we'll if we can do all those things and a lot more that still needs to be done and developed, I think we will foster environments and communities that are safe and are productive, and hopefully can minimize these and push to the edges these bad behaviors that we know people tend towards when they're virtual.
I think just before we go to Stephen, look, you raise a really important point that's also close to my heart, given some of the research that I did in the past. We talk about user-centric design and how important it is to consult users. But actually, when you look at underrepresented groups, often we make assumptions for them that are incorrect, be it neurodiversity or physical diversity. And I remember having a conversation with a client quite recently around, putting wheelchair ramps in the metaverse, and they couldn't understand why that was required. They just assumed that everyone who was in a wheelchair would want to be physically able in the metaverse. So it's a really, really good point. Stephen, I know you've been keen to
dying to
say,
yeah. Because this is such an important and fundamental issue of metaverse today, and something that I'm actually very encouraged that this topic is even on the agenda. So I really would like to applaud IFII for putting up this topic. The reason is the following. So, for example, so I want to qualify my previous statement about the similarities between video games and the metaverse and so forth. Look, in the video games, so there's a game called God of War. It's a classic PS2 game. My friend was the artistic director of this, and it turns out that even the game designers themselves tend to be fatigued is not the right word. As you grow older, you start looking at your achievements in life, as it were, and you think about, yes, I've got this massive game that I designed, and it's gone down in history as one of the most successful games in the world, and so forth. But is this really what I want to impart to the world as a legacy? And also the key thing, in the games, folks, if you are murderous, if you're a serial killer, you're rewarded for being a serial killer.
Yeah.
And there's no consequence. There's no legal consequence. You get your points. The whole gaming mentality, as it were, is to survive to kill and to kill and not be killed, and you get the boss guy, and you win the game, right? But now, in the metaverse, to the extent that this maps reality onto the virtual world, right? But on the screen, cognitively, they look very, very similar. Right, you're playing Fortnite, and it is actually a precursor to, it's a type of metaverse, like I mentioned, but if you did that in the virtual world, if you did that in the real world, right, you land, you parachute into an environment, right, and you're literally murdering everybody around you. That's your goal, right? And not be killed. And I found that game deeply stressful because, I'm not very good at, motor control, whatever, speaking of neurodiversity. And I think I got killed, instantly 5-6 times or what have you. And, that fosters the addictive behavior as well.
Yeah.
You see, the way it's designed, it rewards, if you will, illegal and misbehavior.
I think that's really interesting because it is not just about killing, right? I mean, if you look at games like Grand Theft Auto, they glorify becoming crime lord and drug
100%.
dealers and all sorts, right?
So you have a generation of game players or gamers
Yeah.
that were rewarded for misbehaving and so forth, right? How do you foster the behavioral change and mentality when you have the screen that looks identical? So for example, in the modern day warfare, so there's something that was dawning on me, right? One of the key developments of modern day warfare is that you have an autonomous drone, or you have a video controlled drone, and it's literally dropping bombs and whatnot, but on the screen it looks identical to a video game, right? So what does that do to your brain? So this is a really key issue, right? So my co-founders and myself and some of the most senior game developers in the industry and so forth is something that we're really interested in examining, right? And questioning, and hopefully, so there was a question about public-private partnership, and to your point, Sophia, there has to be some sort of ethical guideline that informs this type of development. So the final thing I want to say is in AI, in artificial intelligence, we talk about responsible AI and whatnot, right? And I had the pleasure of speaking at the Global AI Summit, and I talked about the human agency. In other words, the key distinguishing characteristic of AI is that it makes autonomous decisions on our behalf, on the behalf of human beings, right? So you take out human agency. What do you get? If you have a supercomputer that makes decisions on behalf of human beings, and you see this over and over again in movies and whatnot, look, human beings have a tendency to destroy themselves, so why not help you out? I'll help you out. Look at the pattern of history, right? Well, I will do it for you, right? So that is kind of the neutral, absence of human agency. So we have to put it back in with values that serve human beings, right? So that was something that I was sort of, really keen to advocate. And this is even more so, I think, because this affects young minds. Anytime you get relieves young people of their agency and responsibility, I get very worried, right? So one of the reasons I became a professor, to affect the change. But in any event, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
I think it's such a valid point. And just sort of staying with ethics, right? If you look at, again, other aspects of the physical world, like intellectual property, digital identity, digital ownership, property rights. I was at a panel yesterday, and there was a great quote from George Washington, who, when they were founding the United States, said, freedom and property rights are intertwined. They're one and the same. Yet, you just mentioned earlier, Stephen, Facebook has rebranded itself Meta. They're spending billions trying to own the metaverse, right? Inviting us in. How do we retain all these freedoms and all these aspects, like our digital identity, that is so vital to us on the metaverse? And Beverly, I'd like to start with you on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, I have a comment, though, on the last one. Because
Okay.
I didn't get to talk about it, and I really want to talk about it.
Please do.
Is that
Please do,
okay?
yeah, of course.
And then maybe you pass it to somebody else.
No.
So from my perspective, we have an opportunity as humanity to make a difference right now with the metaverse. And I didn't hear anybody else talk about it. We talk a lot about what all the problems are and what the government should do, but I think it's each and every one of our responsibility to make sure when we do it this time, since we're at the inception of it,
Absolutely.
that we do it right. We are a splintered world and a splintered society in each one of our cultures, And as a result of that, this is something I think that can bring us together. And I really think it's the crux of humanity and how we take this forward, right? We may not have done it right the last 3 times, but hopefully we've learned from our mistakes. And every one of us wants to participate in the future, right? And we have that opportunity right now. And it's every one of our responsibilities. It's not somebody else's responsibility to do it for us. So I just think we all have to be bought into a better future for everyone instead of just for our splinter of the world.
I think that's such a great point, and thank you for adding that. And it's interesting because you mentioned AI and ethics, and I find I'm involved in that subject as well. I find the acceleration of the subject of ethics in AI has been much, much faster than in any other technological topic. But I find in the metaverse it's coming even more early to the forefront.
Yeah. So we talk about like the data privacy and your digital presence and what that means and the morphing of oneself to be somebody else, right? And you see it all over right now in social media, and I see what it's doing to my family and to my kids' friends. I have a bunch of teenagers. And so, I see that happening, and hopefully we don't let that happen in this new format. I would hope that we are better than what's come before us. But to answer your question that you actually asked me, the digital versus the physical and the assets that are within the metaverse, I'm really lucky as part of NEOM to kind of have the promise of 2030 in my hands some days. And what's beautiful about this thing is that we are building it from the ground up. So as the physical is being built, the virtual is being built in that same time period. We get to decide what those privacy standards are going to be. We get to look at every aspect of society, and it's a greenfield. So for us personally, we have probably, I think I said the other day it was 17. I have another one, so I'm up to 18 different metaverse projects. But they span all sorts of things. They span food, and they span sustainability, and working within an environment, and figuring out how to make inclusivity not be about skin color or ethnicity, but about every aspect of the human being, and also about being inclusivity of thought, where one person doesn't get to decide that another person can't have those feelings, right? And so everybody's feelings matter. Now, you may not matter equally because somebody else is the decision maker, but there should be also an inclusivity of voice. So we're looking at all of that as we go across NEOM.
That's absolutely great. Thank you. I'd like to pass to you, Richard, actually, on the subject.
So I mean, when we really start thinking about, I think, let's call it, intellectual property, identity, those aspects of these, metaverses and kind of associated emerging technologies. I remember I guess it was 2017, sitting in a bar in Dallas, Texas. We had rented out for a few days to do final logic and code review on the, what was at the time, the ERC 721 proposition, which became the Ethereum NFT standard, basically. And I mean, we weren't considering, the early use cases like the Bored Apes and, this little art bubble we had over the last year or so. We were really talking about a lot of these aspects in terms of the virtual components. We were also talking about physical versions of it, maintaining chain of custody, whether it's a property deed or, provenance of a piece of art or things like that. But I think it's exactly the same types of issues in the virtual world, where it's even easier to duplicate things and copy them, right? And so, creators are important, and we need creative people. And we also need to make sure that they're able to survive and make a living, and that they're not just purely dependent on, generous patronage of, those willing to support them, because that'll never cover the whole spectrum of creativity. And so, those technologies like NFTs and things like that have real use cases in this environment around protecting identity, protecting intellectual property, and, I think kind of shielding some of the, kind of several, other digital, historical theft and things like that. And, I grew up in the, era of, Napster with, music piracy and things like that. And May in college have had a small, short-lived company that facilitated some of those activities. I won't, say a name or cop fully to it, but So I've been on both sides of this, and I think that we have the opportunity now, to both bring ethicists into this early, which I think is happening, but also to put the right technologies in place in all of these different environments across all of the various metaverses, whatever that actually means, not just the virtual worlds, to really, I think, facilitate a safer environment for creativity, to give the creators the opportunity and the option to make things freely available or not. And I think we'll probably very quickly see lots of microtransaction type of kind of fintech things pop up in these environments. There's a book that was written almost 2 decades ago now called Rainbow's End by Werner Vinge, who's a professor at UC San Diego, that I think he is an incredible futurist, and there's a lot of kind of these concepts that he was thinking about a few decades ago that are really starting to become relevant now, and that is one of the many things that I think has influenced my thinking and guided it. So I'd recommend reading that if you get the opportunity. It's a fun book, but it's insightful.
That's great, and I'll invite anyone to comment, I guess, on this. But does that presuppose that the metaverse has to be owned by the population and not by corporations? Because if I'm going to create the next sort of Bored Ape NFT, if I have to give 30% to the corporation that owns the metaverse just to be able to exhibit it in there, or I have to give 30% of my property value to a corporation just to be able to lease it. Do you think that creates a conflict? I'm happy for anyone to chip in, by the way. It's not just you.
I'll jump in, and I'll be brief so other people can share their opinions as well. But I mean, I think that it's problematic. You do see projects like Decentraland and the like that are really trying to build up, which I know you were referencing, which are really trying to build up these decentralized environments. But it does take a lot of investment to build this infrastructure, even if it's non-physical infrastructure. It's a lot of assets. There's still infrastructure that it needs to run on and things like that. So that's a really hard question. It would be nice to have a world where the environment's fully democratized. I think it'll be a while before that's possible, if it ever is truly possible. So
that's fair enough.
Please jump on this. All right, I think we have a couple of minutes left, so I'll just quickly say something about the future, if you will, of the metaverse as I see it. AI went through something called the AI winter, as we all know, and what brought it back to the forefront, and particularly machine learning used to be, in fact, a marginalized field. Now it's the mainstream, which has to do with the so-called 3 Vs: veracity, volume, and algorithms, and veracity, volume, and speed, velocity, right? So data is abundant. Now, there's algorithms to analyze these data, and the chips are cheap. Therefore, now there's a huge resurgence of you like the resurgence of,
yeah.
You have a big smile on your face. So chances are metaverse is kind of at that stage, and it'll probably pick up, and the real confluence between AI and metaverse is probably where the real excitement is, I think. In fact, my co-founder is he's a practicing surgeon and has a PhD in AI, it turns out. And we're working on a piece of tech that'll hopefully merge these two as well. And so I think, ultimately the future is very, very bright. But what it is, I think, is like AI, that we really need to think this, this ethics and the responsibility stuff really thoroughly. And to your point, Beverly, I mean, we really have to, be responsible to our offsprings and next generation and so forth. So that's my final closing thought. Thank you.
Thank you. With I think a minute probably left, Moudhi, did you want to have any closing remarks?
Yeah, I would like to comment on the digital identity part. It all depends on how do we want really to interact online. What are we expecting from the metaverse, really? It depends on, do we really want to be the same physical identity represented online, or do we want to be someone else? And that is that's what the metaverse is suggesting, is with a click you can change your skin, you can change your weight, you can change whatever you want. And that is where the digital identity we need to think about it. And that's what will lead into the mental health. If someone gets attached to their digital identity online during the metaverse interactions, and then they go back to their reality, what will happen back then? If they have a perfect life on metaverse that is giving them everything, and as you said, some people might have some challenges in physical life, and then they go online and they have this perfect life where they have a perfect health, a perfect body, a perfect everything, and then they wouldn't care much about the real physical life. And that's really something that personally worries me, because it's happening within gamings. We saw some really scary incidents of shooting happened, and they are been streamed online. And when you look at these shooting incidents, it's as you said, identical to the gaming environment. So it's something that we need to think about and be prepared, because it's just going to be more challenging and more worrying.
Thank you, Moudhi. Great concluding remarks. Well, I'm sorry, but in the words of Janet Jackson, funny how time flies when you're having fun. We're out of time, I'm afraid, and I'm told we've got ministers coming in. So in replacement of questions, we're going to file out and be out in the little green area out there. If anybody wants to come and say hello or ask us questions, we'll stand around for a bit. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you, panelists, for what was a great conversation. And of course, talking to you soon.